So, hi. How's the afternoon, evening going? Good. For the people that have been hosting the breakout sessions, there's already a GitHub issue where you can put the challenges and opportunities in the issue. Just please have it before 11 a.m. tomorrow, because then that gives us time to recompile for the conclusion and the closing session tomorrow. So now we're going to do a breakup session. Topics we're going to have on this side: progressive enhancement, which is going to be led by Thomas. And in the other side, the other room, we're going to have VR storytelling, which led by Isabel. And then this is going to last for 45 minutes, and then we're going to engage in the last two breakout sessions, which is first encouraging diversity in WebVR, which is going to be set in that room, and we're going to have social VR in this part of the room. So again, the one that is immediately following is progressive enhancement here with Thomas, and VR storytelling with Isabel. So let's break.
Okay, who is here?
For a digest, yeah.
Where is the person who is in charge of here?
Thomas. Thomas? Yes, coming here.
So I prefer to start the discussion by if somebody has a use case is working on or has worked on including progressive enhancement and add troubles with it, so we can see what the problems are and start on this with a discussion. So if somebody wants to take the discussion going about a use case you had, maybe not looking at you, but like if you want.
Okay, for example, when we were building one prototype, we wanted to make the users get really fast to understand how they should use the controllers. And usually this is a huge problem. So we actually mapped software buttons on the hardware in VR, and this helped them a lot because we tried with showing a tutorial in the beginning and using this kind of graphics on the controllers. The graphics part worked much better because no one looks at the tutorials, they don't remember them. So when you visually point to the people how to use the controllers, they can do it much faster. So this is a good thing we can use as a practice.
Okay. So yeah, a bit like I think like example which comes to mind is like Tilbrush is showing directly, like you have to look at the controllers, but when you are looking at them, you have indications, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you mean.
We have exactly.
Okay, so that's so coming back, tell me if you're not I don't know who's your colleague who spoke this morning. Yeah, you're not there.
He's there.
It's like how do you manage? So that was a question I had and I forgot to ask it. It's you talked about controllers, so Gear VR controller and the HTC Vive, which both have a trigger and a touchpad.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the Daydream doesn't have trigger, right? From what I remember.
Daydream, I think.
So how do you manage, as you mapped everything for trigger and touchpad, to have things working on the Daydream? Like, how did you face this problem?
I think we haven't tried it.
Speak up.
That
Okay.
was.
I think we haven't tried it on the Daydream. So I cannot say for it.
Okay.
One of the things that we did was something that games have been doing like 30 years, but you have a certain amount of actions that you want users to be able to do, like go forward or click, and if they are simple enough and they are less than 4 or 5, they can be mapped on any controller that is currently available. So I believe this is a good way to think about it, and it's a good way that we can also allow the people to change the mappings of their keys, of their actions, because if you have a very complex controller and you have a certain scheme that you like, for instance, you don't want to use the trigger as your main do something, but you want to, for instance, tap the touchpad, this is something that gives you good abstraction and can be directly borrowed from other industries where it's extremely successful.
Okay, so I think this point has been talked about this morning about like allowing the users to map their own buttons and things, but how would you see doing that? Like how I am supposedly like on a desktop before or on the mobile, I'm going to a list of inputs and saying, okay, I want this, or how would you see that? What would be the most practical way for people to do that without getting bored and being like, okay, if I have to go through a whole setup before accessing your app that I don't even know about, I'm not going to spend time on it. So how could you fix that problem?
Basically, it should be universal. It should work for all WebVR experiences. You should be able to set it once and then work across all WebVR experiences. Otherwise, it will be very complex.
If we agree to some actions that are available everywhere, or at least some of them, then they can be mapped by the user once. The same way that you have on desktop, you have a click, but you can do it with a mouse. You can do it on your phone by touching, and you can do it by pressing enter on your keyboard. And it's the same thing basically. But in VR we don't have it. You don't have a default action to do something.
And you know, I was thinking, how can we do that? We were discussing that we have to somehow agree on controls. The thing is that if people start sharing more about their experience and what they discovered, I would not really do the same experiment. If I read somewhere that someone's done something and it works for him, why should I lose 1 day or 2 days to do the same experiment? I will take the results and implement them in my prototype. That's, for example, how we are building most of the prototypes in the office. We look at different VR experiences, not even specifically WebVR, and we see how people have done great examples of UX and terrible examples of UX. So we get the good stuff and we put them in the browser context.
Yeah, but that would be, so that implies two things for me. Is that first, like, you need to find those information, so they need to be available on, like, I know that's the good thing about the communities that we have, is like everybody is mostly about sharing things, but so you need to find it in the first place, and then you need to find it appealing for the use case that you have yourself. So I was in my mind trying to find what are the interactions that we have in VR today, and it's like pointing and clicking, probably like so the laser kind of thing where you're looking somewhere at an interface, be it a 3D model or 2D model, and then clicking on it, and there's grabbing. Are there some of the things which are like very just for VR interactions that you see that we could add to this kind of list of interactions?
I mean, obviously we can think about the HoloLens, the bloom, the click. I mean, these are three interactions. I talked yesterday about the baseline of accessible inputs in general, from keyboard to touchpad gestures and touch screen and all the other gamepad APIs. And I was narrowing it down to a stick and 4 buttons. Now the remotes with the touchpad, obviously they don't have 4 buttons, but you can split it and you can double click, and so you can also use combinations of those buttons with like clicking 2 buttons at one time, or clicking or toggling in a direction and clicking. So for what we should do is define obviously the most common things people do in VR, which is, you said, click something or push it, pull it, grab it or drop it, and then we're basically having the most basic motions of like what a human hand can do, and then maybe adjust the speed of things. Either you push or you punch, or like that kind of the motoric kind of thing, to translate it, right? Mm-hmm. Just like when you swipe or you flick, it's basically the same motion, but it's faster.
So like a kind of basic physics without having physics, basically.
Yeah. Just to show the motor movement of representation of my hand or my physical motion in virtual space.
Well, only that not all controllers have that available. Yeah.
Also, not all people have the capability to do that.
Not all people have the capability of what?
To move that quickly.
Yeah. So
no, they don't have to, though, because I don't have to have a sixth of remote control. If I have, let's say, an avatar that has an arm, and I press the up arrow on my keyboard, that means I reach out with my arm. Even though I'm not reaching out with my arm, I can be represented as such in VR. So I empower everyone to have an arm in VR.
One which could be like universally maybe applied is like rotation based, because all the controllers have rotation. So that is something which could, like, you have a hand up or down, like hand up and down, like it's. And I know I have seen a lot of apps using also that as a UI, like based on like are you holding your controller like this or that. So that applies also for a Gear VR controller example, which you don't have motion.
I've seen someone do one where you twist and it goes forward like a telescopic arm.
Oh, I see.
All right, that's also. But so that could be applied maybe somehow actually, if that would be easily accessible over the browser level.
And So yeah, so we are adding rotation to the list of interactions, and I think the idea here is to list the interactions, not saying like somebody cannot do them, but like list the interaction and then give the way to map it to whatever device or availability he has, the person has. So yeah, twisting is another thing that can be used as well. And, and at some point, so the question here, so this is just part of progressive enhancement, but that's a very important part, because like who is supposed to do that? Is that supposed, to be the browser doing it? It needs to be across browsers, working across browsers in the same way, like it's handled the same way, so people can just go through one interface to set up the interactions they can have, or is it like a third service thing? I don't like, from your point of view, do you think that's something a browser could?
I think it's something that could be standardized, like much like you can fire a click event with a finger, with a pen, with a mouse. Like, I don't see why there shouldn't be some gestures you could hook into, and at least that way the gestures can be adapted for the hardware the browser is on. So, but it will be an interesting thing to look at how you standardize human motion.
There was the idea of adding more natural interactions in VR. For example, if you want to go to a different website, you can, instead of clicking, you can open something, and you can do this now with any of the controllers. You hold it, for example, you hold the trigger, and you open a window, and you enter a new website. And VR allows us to create these kind of interactions, which are very different, but they add fun to the whole experience, and fun usually makes users more engaged. So we should think of, I'm worried that we stay on the flat plane of clicking, because it's the easiest, and people get it very easy, and it's awesome to get it easy, but it reduces the fun that VR should be bringing.
The exit burrito is like my ideal example of this. Like people remember that so vividly.
Because I'm not sure everybody knows about it.
So the exit burrito. So there's a game on Steam where everything is very skeuomorphic around you, and the way you leave the game is that you pick up the exit burrito, and then you bite it, and it says, "Are you sure?" in the ingredients.
You know, when it's super hot, you can like exit the game by shooting yourself in the head. It's also the first time I need to do it. I was like, okay, which is actually pretty cool way to interact. Also, with going to a level, you just pick up the gun and shoot at the menu to pick up, which is more interactive than just indeed clicking. And so I think that that's something indeed interesting.
Yeah, and that's something you remember. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, you carry on.
So that's part of the interactions, but like not so much about progressive enhancement, but like your example made me raise a question. So I'm pulling something. So if you talk about pushing pulling, that's 6DoF. We cannot do it in 3DoF thing because we can just rotate. So how do I push with something which isn't 6DoF? And even worse, which is like just 3DoF with click. Do I map it somewhere? But like mapping things with just a click, it's like a pretty good challenge. Or do I just like, how do we do progressive enhancement? Do we say that you can do this because you have this kind of equipment, and if you want more, you need better equipment? Or are we trying to map out things to work whatever the device you have? But like, how do we create that?
That's the best option, to have one and the same interactions for one and the same experience across all devices.
Okay.
That's the best choice. That will reduce for sure some of the fun, but for example with this gesture, you can do it while holding the Daydream button, just pull your hand. So you have to.
Actually,
with
with the trade-off, you could hold the button. You can tilt your stick up or down, which would translate into a forward or backward motion of the object you want to manipulate. But if you want to, you can use the same mechanic on a more advanced controller. Maybe we could create some presets. Which would you like to use the alt preset for the trade-off control, or you like to change to more advanced?
That like where indeed like kind of key mapping will come into play, so that if you have trade-off like kind of controller, that you can make yourself this mapping what you want to map, example for pull motion or push motion, and the user could do it themselves.
Yeah. Also, the topic of like progressive enhancement and fun. Progressive enhancements it gets better when the equipment gets better, so I think it's okay if the progressive enhancement isn't fun, but has the option to be fun when the equipment is available.
There's another side to it in terms of if you prescribe too many interactions up front, then you're actually locking down the number of novel interactions that you can produce later. So there are systems, for example, I think I've seen it in Unity now, where you can actually train your own custom interactions, which is something that maybe you want in WebVR going forwards. So you have an experience where I can designate my own action or interaction, that's the fun element, right? So you wouldn't, maybe designating every sort of possible twist gesture is going a bit too far. It's prescribing ahead of the time what we're actually going to do with this stuff, when we might want more freedom and have greater opportunity as other devices come along, right?
Yeah, are you suggesting this kind of stuff is so personal that it's the kind of thing the user would develop over time, and then the abstract motions that we've developed as a user should then be exposed as opposed to...
I think that's an interesting idea, because you could take the idea that if someone's doing sword play in VR or something, that they might actually want to get better or improve over time. They might want to feel that the system is responding to their action in a different way rather than just twist. We've measured a twist. I don't know. In a way, I think this kind of goes into the stuff that you're doing in some ways.
Yeah, but if you create a baseline of motions and just like gestures on a cell phone touchscreen, that doesn't mean that you're limited in the chaining of those events. You can always create combinations. Just like when we played NES game consoles, like Mortal Kombat, they have all these like special moves. Obviously, it's not as free as having a 6-stop controller, and I don't know if it would be fair to compete with someone in the same room that has a 6-stop controller against some magic combination gamepad. But on the other hand, I think accessibility is about navigating. It's about accessing information, and that is infrastructure, user interfaces, and those have to be like regulated. There should be some kind of common sense in how to navigate, highlight, read out information, consume information, and it should be across everywhere the same. And it's not a creation tool, it's a consumption tool. So if I say a painter should be progressively enhanced, I understand that at some point keyboard wouldn't do as much of a beautiful job as a 6-stop brush. But it's about like getting from A to Z in a narrative across the board. And that's
but on the topic of a painter, like at what point do we say that this control, like your headset isn't suitable for painting, but it's great for viewing stuff in 3D, therefore we're going to give you a different experience, but it's the best we can do given the circumstances. And I think progressive enhancement can take that form as well.
I think what I hear a lot in the WebVR community is like, because that is the web, or like people say, it's the keep it the same for everything, and to keep it the same for everything in all the experiences. But indeed, that's not something I think it's. I mean, if you have a nice headset, you have like a big computer and everything, you want to have the extras because you can. And I think if you don't, then indeed maybe you can do less stuff, but that's how it is.
So just to jump in there, I mean, there's an interesting promotional video on Apple about how they do video cutting for accessibility, which it's insane to look at, because they actually have a wheelchair bound person that only has like a zip puff or whatever control, and she's able to video cut like this highly complex multi-layer video layer and audio layer experience. But that's then the challenge of the software to create an interface that uses the very basic predefined gestures that are accessible. So going back to a painter, if I want to have a dimensional way how to paint in 3 dimensions, then I need to be able to navigate with the baseline gestures, and then give me a menu, a pop-up menu where I can choose, okay, now go in the deep, and next menu, now go to the right, or up, down. So give me 6 stuff navigation. It's like a tree menu kind of interaction to simulate a free motion of a hand. But that is the responsibility of the software to take care of that, because it has a set of standardized input, and then, like I said, you can chain those kind of things. So we don't have to solve everyone's like challenges. There are certain creative ways how to apply those kind of baseline inputs to all different levels.
Yeah, so I think we have 2 different views or solutions, which, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but so either we map things for everyone, and we give ways for people to map every possible interaction. If I'm on desktop, I want to be able to do things that people do in 6DoF. It will be way more difficult because it will be way slower, but I can still be allowed to do it. Or we can decide to say, okay, you're on desktop, so you have X experiment, and you are in 6DoF, you have Y experiment, which are different. That's a take we've taken on the game we've done with on Diego, which is like if you're on a computer, you have like a gameplay where you see things from the top, and you place you push the spacebar to shoot at enemies. If you have a 3DoF, you are just looking around, you're tapping to shoot at enemies. And if you have a 6DoF, you are looking on the field, and you shoot at enemies with your arms. So those are in the same game, 3 very different gameplays, depending on which device you're using to access the game. So I think that's 2 points of view which are equally interesting, but the question is like, so what do we do? So it's I guess the software developers which will be taking the decision of what to do. But in terms of browser vendors, it may be interesting because without them it will be more difficult to have this interaction mapping allowed. And if the experience is saying like, whatever interaction mapping you have, I don't want you to do it because I think it's shit, should we allow them, or should there be a way to bypass, say, a painter on desktop you cannot paint, but I want to paint and I don't have a 6DoF. Should I be allowed to do this, or should it be to the software's decision to not allow me to do so?
Well, I think that actually it should be like users should be supersede like actually browser configuration or software configuration, or especially on the web. Like it applies for everything else in a web that user has control in his browser, what he loads in. So I guess for WebVR it should not be no exception. But you decide to play video or audio in the browser. You permit it or you allow it, and you allow controls be in your browser. So you should have also control what they're doing in your browser.
I think it's something where the browser could potentially help by abstracting the controllers away. So instead of presenting you have 1 to n controllers available, and this is their position and rotation. Instead you have, here is an approximate IK rig where we've mapped 1 to 2 arms and 1 to 2 legs, maybe a torso and a head. Here is, and if if you only have one controller, or you only have a 3 degrees of freedom controller, then it interpolates one of them and just leaves the other arm like not available. And then it's the user to say, look, I'm only going to use my right or left hand for this control. And the game doesn't know if you have a 6-DoF or 3-DoF controller. The browser does what it can to interpolate what that motion means to an approximate human skeleton.
Do you think it's feasible? Because that reminds me, Mike Blakes from your team from Samsung tried to do something like this for 3-DoF on the headset. So he wanted people to be able to kind of move inside things. So by moving the head, kind of you had some way of testing things and to move a bit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't very, like the result wasn't as, didn't go as far as he wanted it to go from the beginning. So it's like IKEA I worked on this a few years back. It's a very, very complicated thing to master correctly, to have things.
Well, I'd like to think it's the kind of thing where if a browser had a significant team of very smart people and some machine learning, where you've done a lot of tracking of where the controller thinks it is and where it actually is in regards to a person, then hopefully you could build something, and then that could be one way for the browsers to compete and be like, our browser has better 3 degrees of freedom controller mapping to IK-rig than. But this is just like an out there theory which would require buy-in from many browsers, but it's something I think could be very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes me think of it over taking the power over the website on their decisions. Make me think that on mobile, so most of the websites now have a mobile version, but the browser vendors all allow you to go back to the desktop version by tricking the UA, the user agent, I guess. So it allows you to not let the website know that you're on a mobile, because and sometimes the mobile version is shit. So it allows you to just see the things that they should be seen. So that's the way where it's been done in progressive enhancement for mobile already. To bounce on that.
Would people think that's like a good idea for the browser to provide some kind of IK rig, or do you think
if the browser provides it, then it can also provide accessibility tools on top of it. So
yeah,
the browser provides the input, then the tools which you made were really great, but not everybody has to use them as tools anymore. It's becoming a browser problem.
I feel like if you go into the providing a rig thing, then you're basically dictating also how 3D models are going to be like moved around. And I had some discussions with people that create content, and they say like, don't touch my 3D models because it like create an environment.
Well, they don't have to use it. I mean, it's not like
they can just only use the position of the hand.
Right. Yeah, and they can do it.
They don't have to use the entire bone.
So if the browser provides you this set of points, I guess, a set of numbers.
Yeah, it would essentially be like, this is the angle between here and here, here and here, here and here.
So you get an approximation, or like just the feed of Yeah, right.
Yeah, from what I understood, it was just like to enable a 3-DoF controller to act like a 6-DoF controller, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like moving whatever is in the game, it's just sending orientations.
Well, the idea is that it would do the whole skeleton, so it can progressively enhance for when we are doing whole skeletons.
Okay.
I do like the idea of the skeleton,
yeah.
Especially because you have like a native way of having like inverse kinetics and stuff like that.
So giving more information, but then the software can decide to use just the position of the end.
Precisely,
okay.
And the skeleton idea is really nice. That will give a really nice abstract API or something to use to manipulate the scene in that.
And also, if the browser is the one handling it, then you don't have to say, I only have one controller, or I only have a 3-DoF controller, or I'm in a wheelchair. The browser can be like, oh yeah, they're actually 6 foot tall and
coming back
have the best equipment. Yeah.
And would that be something which is systematically enabled, or that it's like an add-on that you could use or not?
You'd probably have to set it up when you like you were trying to do VR stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, like do some settings for your avatar. It's just me spitballing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the same as if you buy a headset right now. Basically the same thing as if you buy a headset right now. You need to do your personal settings in the beginning, and after that it's fine. So.
And that's a question. So would your mother do that? Like, I'm just speaking to my mother further. Like, I know my parents have difficulties with phones which are smartphones. So I'm like, if they are on a browser, like, can we bring people to do this kind of setting up things, or is there a way to do it for them in a very, and how do we do it? Do we do it in VR?
One thing I've seen, which I think is really clever, is that you go into, this is for some of the Vive scenes, and you basically stand in and do a little dance. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, great, now I've measured your shoulders, your arms, your legs. Like, you basically do head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And, which is a British nursery rhyme for head, shoulders. And then it knows where all your joints are. So you would be like, you could pick up the controllers and be like, you're not Ada, you're Ada's mum, who's very tiny. And my dad is very giant. You could tell who I took after. So just recalibrate your body, or that sounds wrong, but like touch your boom, 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 and then you're now ready to go, because I've worked out where you are. And it probably won't be as accurate, because it can probably do stuff like learn over time how you like to move and stuff like that. But
yeah, no, that's a very good thing. Okay.
But then I'm saying this, and I wouldn't have to be the one who implemented it, so.
Yeah, we know, but your name is associated to this.
Yes.
All right, so that if do everybody thinks it's a good idea, and maybe Jordan can talk about it on the Google's point of view of what about like making some way of a rig which is enabling people, whatever input they have, to mimic a whole skeleton and give those information to the software, so that the software can use it whatever device the user has. So basically, if I'm just moving my mouse, it could interpolate the whole rest of the body to mimic a 6DoF interaction.
You're talking about like how in 3DoF we use ARM models?
Yeah, by example.
Yeah. I don't know. Has such an interaction been implemented?
I don't. Well, that's the thing. Like, it makes me ring a bell that Borismus. I don't know if he's still working for Google, but
he is.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
Like, and he was. I'm still going back to the laser interaction, and he was like, okay, so the laser interaction, when you have a cardboard, it's you're between the eyes, basically a point between the eyes. But if you have a controller, a 3DoF controller, where is the origin of the laser? So it was interpolating things from like a false arm, and then I've seen some pictures that he took of the rig.
That's how Daydream works as well.
Yeah, for Daydream it was.
And I believe probably with Samsung device work, they have like an ARM model, and it's actually recommended that you implement your own ARM model in software depending on the kind of interaction that you're aiming for. So you can do a bit of that on your own. You get the controller values back, but you can sort of.
So on your sense, it would be the software which should do this.
So
IKEA thing.
In native, sometimes you can be provided a default ARM model, but it's actually quite valuable for the content author to be able to customize the ARM model being used, because the ARM model I might want for like a laser pointer could be different from like tennis, where there's like a drawback, which could be different from like throwing axes or something in a video game. And the types of motions that you need from the ARM model are subtly different. So it depends on tuning. If you're just doing sort of 2D ray-based input, like laser pointer style, then you can typically use a default like ARM model. But once you get into gaming, being able to tune those parameters is useful.
So I think the idea there was to push things, so that's still like, yeah, shooting at stars, but push things so any, like the IKEA made by the browser vendors enable any kind of interactions. So basically just by information from a 3DoF controller, I could either do this or just this. and that the controller will give enough information to the IK system to know what I'm doing. Is that right?
I think that might already be the case, but do you know in 2.0 there's, I know, like laser-based pointing and some other thing, like there's some more stuff in there.
All input in 2.0 is just like a big question mark.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, no one knows.
I think the type of thing that you're thinking about is a design problem that people are trying to solve for. To Jordan's point, I'm not sure if there's a, like,
no,
any
I'm not
solution
saying
that's
it's
agreed upon.
done already. I'm saying like in the future, should we do these kind of things? And that's why that I think if browser vendors don't manage to do it, it's difficult to ask it to startups to do whole.
Well, not just startups, like just some random. It'd be nice if some random developer who hasn't really done much before could work with it. Because
so to your point, I think we probably want enablers to be able to create things for like in 3DOF systems, like different ARM models, but I think it's still very useful to be able to customize those models in user space. So I don't know how things will shake out, but I would hope and I would guess that there would probably be some way to sort of swap out ARM models. So rather than the ARM model being a part of the platform, maybe you end up with something like libraries that you could pull in ARM model. Again, I'm totally waving my hands here. I don't think anything has been created or decided upon, but
or even if it was like an object with default one, and you can swap it round.
Just
sorry.
Because the mic is.
Well, we can think about it like the use of fonts and browsers. You have the default fonts, and then you can have custom fonts pulled in. So the same way we define a default IK model with maybe a default glove, and as soon as you pull in a library, you can pull in your own kind of GLTF models to customize that kind of stuff, or you just ignore it, and you don't have to at all use the IK, but just giving it a baseline is empowering every kind of content creator to already have something that they know works in the same language. Just like gestures on iPhone defines the gestures and everybody follows suit. So we can give the browsers the power to define gestures in VR, and then say, hey, if you want to build on top of that, guess what? Give me a little tutorial of how to use else my inputs, and then that's defined for that specific app. But otherwise, 99% of the other apps can use the default things, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time.
Has anybody here used... sorry, go ahead.
Fabien,
This is the first time I'm bringing this emetics in the browser. I was like, wow, that's not supposed to be here. But to me, if we do a shift to say, that's not a browser anymore, it's like your whole body goes in the content. The browser is a proper way to consume immersive content, and it does start to make sense.
But the camera are your eyes.
Yeah.
Right?
Just
so
like
that's already part of your body.
you're missing the rest of your body, that's all.
You know, like if you...
I mean, it's just a huge shift. Okay, now it's one proper way to
And I think we need huge shifts, because like we are talking about something which is completely different, and we are using it with the old ways, so that'd be interesting. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, earlier I was just going to say, I was going to ask if anyone had tried out A-Frame's current solution for this problem, so you can attach multiple controller components to the scene, and so you can get like a component, for example, for a 3DOF controller, like a Daydream controller, or presumably like an Oculus Go controller, that kind of thing. And they have an ARM model built into the library as well, so you get a default ARM model, and the values that you get out of the component are the values that you'd want to use to do like a ray casting and that sort of thing. So it does a lot for free. So it's kind of an example of one way that you can, I guess, provide a turnkey solution, like sensible defaults, but still have that customization.
On a similar note, there's the component, it's like universal control, the universal controls component or something similar, where it does include all of those, and it picks the appropriate one, which I think you mentioned earlier. That, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be. And in terms of, like we've mostly discussed about interactions, is there something else? So progressive management covers a lot of other things, so I don't think we'll be able to talk about them because we're supposed to be finished now. But if there's something which is like a program you think we could quickly talk about.
Is there a way to, on a browser level, lock to landscape, so if you turn your head more than 45 degrees, it doesn't switch on? It's basically all hardware level, right? What is it?
You mean on mobile?
Orientation lock.
Yeah.
Orientation lock.
It's in Android, right?
Sorry?
Like I remember, it's in the. It's mentioned in the polyfill service. Not the polyfill, the WebVR polyfill, that it uses it where available, but I don't think it's available for iPhones.
It is, but it's shitty. Like I've worked on this last week, so yeah, it's shittily done, and it's very like. But yeah, that's something also that we would need proper proper implementation of those things.
And traverse.
And traversal, yeah, traversal is something another problem I'd say. But yeah, traversal is just Firefox thing for now. I don't think Google has worked on how to do this. Yeah.
We are.
You did?
Oh shit! I'm not.
I mean you.
I'm afraid we're gonna have to cut this right now.
Sorry. Thank you for saving me, Diego. I'm not
yeah, that's been recorded.
So, breakout sessions. The following sessions here we're going to have social VR, which is going to be.
I think you might want to announce that in front of.
They already know. So this session is the only one.
In the end, probably.
At the end of the both breakout session, we are giving the.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so now we're gonna have here in social VR, led by Danny, and in the other room we're gonna have encouraging diversity in WebVR. I'm not sure if I asked. Can you help me hosting this one?
Yeah.
With Billy. So thank you very much.
But it's not only encouraging diversity in VR.
Yeah, I mean, it should not only be in VR, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of things like that. So in VR, diversity is right, but when you go to the real world, it's fucked up. Diversity is simply means that there should be different. It should be available to all different kind of persons.
Where your responsibility ends. That's something like that. Gotten so nice. It's just like I'm stressed out because this guy.
Yeah, it's like a big subject to talk about. Yeah. I think that's not, what I was saying is not only a subject what matters in VR in my opinion, but something that also thinking. Yeah, so.
Exactly. I mean, she's correct. Like, well, she's a trusted developer, so here's this thing, I'll help you with, doing the actual API call. She did the rest, she did just great. But just one material
Is the seat taken?
No, it's not.
How did it go?
Good.
Yeah. How's it going?
Good. Apparently I'm hosting this. I didn't even know. Diego came up and said, well,
and I didn't think about picking
a social VR will be hosted by Danny. Me?
Right, eh?
I hope this is social VR. No,
yes.
No, it's not.
Yeah, that was yesterday's.
Hey, host.
Hey, boss. We're all here for social VR. Yeah?
Why are you all sitting so far away?
Clearly they don't like each other.
I'm
Not
guessing
very
someone is real asocial.
So
Okay, so me and my invisible friend will run this.
we might have to like call. Hey guys.
Guys, are you here for social VR?
Actually, yes, I am.
Oh, well, keep socializing.
Why don't you guys sit around the table a little bit better?
Yes, sorry
So
for that.
see each other.
I just think we might need to be closer for the microphone, that's all.
In fact.
That's why I thought like we're still chatting because they were saying that it would be nice first.
Oh, really?
I think,
What?
I
they
think
said they
didn't
would
they
be
scrap it?
They seem to have scrapped it, yeah.
Is there pizza left? Oh, no, don't digest.
I'm still digesting it. That's basically I have to move out of that thing that I was.
Was it social VR?
Social VR, I think it was, just social. So I don't know if this is being recorded, this session, or not.
I think it's still live.
Okay. I love you, Mum. So, well, I guess the first thing to sort of discuss is what people think social VR is to begin with. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, even have a few platforms, but I'd really like to hear a few other people describe what they think a social VR experience might be. You know, asynchronous or synchronous, avatars, real-time, you know, like Skype video. What do people think is a social VR experience?
So I don't feel lonely.
Oh,
I think
emotion.
with you guys, it's fine now.
I think the basics of a social VR experience is that you can interact with each other in VR, and if that can be a basic interaction like wave or look at each other, or even not seeing each other but just touching the same thing and see that. So somebody was talking about, I don't know, I saw a picture of a light today, so if I touch the light, then on the other side of the world somebody who has the same light and then lights up, so you know that people is thinking of you. And so something like that is already socially interaction. I think that's the most basic interaction someone can get in VR, for example.
Has anyone tried any social VR experiences, and what platforms or experiences have you tried that you think are cool and worth mentioning?
Yes,
Any land?
My favorite is Rec Room.
Rec Room.
It's the one where I felt most immersed when in VR, because a part of it being social is also fun. But having so much fun with other people just makes it very, very immersive.
I think with that one, you're kind of meant to misbehave. You feel it's okay to do that. Maybe a little bit encouraged.
Well, actually, I let my cousin play in Rec Room once, and it was his first VR experience. And he didn't really have the feeling that the other people were real. And in my opinion, I was feeling bad because I thought he was misbehaving too much.
Can somebody explain what Rec Room is actually? Because I'm not entirely sure. How do you
It's this social space that has different games. So you have like paintball, where you just have like adventure games, or you can just have this gymnasium where you can play basketball, or ping pong, or beer pong, or just talk.
Okay, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Definitely looking good.
And it's free.
I had a VR multi-user social experience. I was at a conference, JSConf US 2015, I think, and I basically showed a demo, more or less like ADA's demo, where we had everyone turn into a horse, because that was the only model I had on my computer while I was on the transatlantic flight. And you would basically just join a room, and because I couldn't be bothered to actually make the animations work, you were flying as a horse. So we had like 35 people flying around on conference Wi-Fi in a virtual environment as horses and having like a blast with their cardboards.
That sounds hilarious.
So yeah, it was hilarious. It worked pretty damn well for what it was, but I would not dare to deploy that anywhere in the world.
And what's the name of this thing? Does it have a title?
It does not have a title. The title is, I have to make this work and I have 8 hours.
Okay.
So that was pretty much the working
Love
project
the name.
title.
Very catchy.
Yeah.
Clickbaity.
Definitely.
I boarded a flight to Jacksonville. You wouldn't believe what happened next.
And were they controlling their movements somehow? Was it in VR? Everyone just cardboard.
Yeah,
so
it was cardboard. So I didn't have like any interactions. The only thing you could do is was cardboard 2, so you could at least click. And I used that to, whenever you hold down the button, you would start moving forward in the direction you're looking at. So you could like literally just go wee, and then that's what people did, and they chased each other, and you know.
And they were all in the same room? Or
they were all in the same room. It was a shared room. And the thing is, I designed it, so I had like 6 cardboards with me, and I designed it for like 6 people, and then they told me the day before my presentation, actually the day of the presentation in the morning, they told me everyone has a cardboard in the swag bag, and I'm like, what? So yeah, that was fun.
And so the element of why it was a success as a social experience was because other people, well, knew the other horses were people, for one thing.
Yes.
But perhaps the unexpected nature of it?
It was the unexpected and the shared nature of it. It's this entire phenomenon of knowing, yes, there are real people attached to the horses on the other side of this interaction, and I think social does not have to have even complicated interactions, and I would say waving even is already like an advanced interaction, because, you know, I would say though that to be a really social experience, it has to be synchronous. I don't think it would have had the same effect if you would see horses recorded by someone else. I don't think that's necessarily a social experience in the closest sense of the word. I'm not saying that asynchronous multi-user interactions do not have an aspect to it that is social. I would say we should draw a line somewhere, and I would draw this line at the border between synchronous and asynchronous.
Well, I've actually, with my colleagues, we've tried we've experimented a bit with that, because in VR you can make anything you like. So what we had was, we had a table in the forest where 4 people sitting around, but every person's perspective was from the same position. And we used the fact that the table was round to order the rest of the people. And nobody noticed until we told them. And one group, they said, hey, look in the distance. And then they noticed, wait, your distance is the same as my distance, it's there. And then it goes wrong. But a different thing I wanted to ask you is, I have this feeling that there's this trade-off between realism and how much stuff you can do in VR. Both contribute to the social aspect. And I think I'm interested in your opinion of what should be, what's important, or maybe how you, what you should focus on.
I can definitely give you my opinion. Interactivity wins over realism any day for a social experience, for something that's memorable. I think there's an expectation to create realism, and I think that's getting in the way of people creating interactions that please people. And I think we can get traction without realism. Not that I don't want realism eventually. I want VR to be indistinguishable or more magical than the real world.
Yeah, look at Job Simulator.
Job Simulator, yeah, that's a great example of, you know, heavy interaction, great flexible interaction.
And Rec Room as well.
Rec Room is like
goofy.
that. Yep.
Very fun.
So is it like Job Simulator meets Facebook Spaces, something like that?
Way better. Facebook Spaces sucks compared to this.
Who's used Facebook Spaces here?
I've tried it. It wasn't too cold to.
Who's used it twice?
It's kind of awesome.
It's actually pretty good implementation, and they've kept it really simple, and they did a whole stack of features like being able to furnish a room and throw furniture in there and move around and all these things. And eventually they pulled all that out, just have one round table, and you around that table and be able to throw 360 scenes around you, video or static, and one screen at the front that you could look at, and a few other tools. And that they scaled it right back to create a first user experience, I think, that is palatable.
I like the avatar system.
Yeah, it takes your profile photos and then creates an avatar that looks a bit like you automatically.
It creates a set of suggestions.
Yeah, and you pick one of the
suggestions. You can then
suggestions.
modify it as well, but it's like a really good starting point. It's a bit of a pain to create an avatar.
Another question, there is the Gear app where you're like in a very pretty place, like Grand Canyon or something, by people. So there's like another type of experience where you have like experiencing something together, so you can share this kind of experience. I think that's another area, right, where it's not about like you're in the same room, but it's like a collective experience.
Is that Google Expeditions? Where they're in VTime. Yeah, VTime is with avatars and 360 scenes, and I think they're using 3D scenes now that are a bit more impressive. Google Expeditions was 360s, but you can see where everyone else is looking. So you have a classroom full of kids who are each with their own cardboard, and that where they're looking is all pointers on the sphere or the 360. Yeah. So that's another type of social experience for 360. I'm interested in that merging of 360 and social.
What I'm wondering is should everyone be in VR for it to be a social VR experience? For example, you have the one with the bomb. I'm not sure how it's called. So one
keep talking over the explosion.
That one, yeah. So that's, in my opinion, also a social VR experience because someone is in VR trying to.
Does everyone know what that is?
Keep talking, nobody explodes.
Have somebody in VR with a bomb in front of them, and then people outside with a manual reading them the instructions on how to disarm it.
Yeah, which is one of, I think, is a very, very good game for VR.
That's the one. I think you're in space and
oh, you've done that one then? Because there's a really fun one that virtual room here in Brussels is actually doing, where like you're there, you come in with 3 friends, and each of you are in a different kind of like room. So you're not in the same space together, but then when you put on the headset, you can see your friends, and they're all wearing like a cool kind of helmet, and like you're basically transported into a different reality where you have a mission and you have a certain time, and if you don't manage to make it, then you have to start over again and stuff. And it's like, it's really cool because it's like using that sort of like new technology to like throw stuff in space. So you have to like learn how to like don't throw it too hard, otherwise like obviously like the laws of physics in space are just gonna like throw it very far, and then like dragging stuff, and also like being aware of like the actual place itself, so you don't run into like the walls and stuff, because once you actually get too close, a red mesh actually appears just like it would if you were actually running into the wall. So it's like, it's really cool how like that social activity kind of like brings in together that sense of like companionship, but also team building, which I thought was really fun in that sense.
That's cool.
It's really fun. It's super fun.
I'd like to ask if we in our online games and multi-user things that run for a long time now, asynchronous versus synchronous. Getting concurrent users is always a problem. I use a formula of your total user base divided by 10. You'll get your active user base divided by 10 again. You might get your concurrent user base. It's like really runs down. But when you've got chat channels and things like that are asynchronous, the usage is way up. A lot more people doing things and continuing conversations. In fact, we try and do that with our virtual worlds, get people to keep chatting while they're not in the virtual world, at least keep communicating via mobile. What about things that are social spaces, like a 3D wiki where people are contributing to a space or growing a garden or things like that? Has anyone seen examples like that, or been compelled to return to something that is an ongoing piece of art or experience?
I've seen a demo which wasn't a social experience, but it suggested one where people were leaving notes where they went. And then what you can do is like people can create traps and other kinds of interactions where people later on encounter when they don't expect it and when they don't know it. So that can be a bit asynchronous.
Is Minecraft or other environments where you can build kind of an asynchronous social experience?
Yeah, I know.
You can use it also with the adventure. You have network adventure, so you can do it synchronous or asynchronous, because you just start to paint with your friend, and then you save the URL, and then anybody can join anytime.
Who's done that? Tried networked a painting, or a painter, or yeah?
Sorry, what was the question?
Who's tried a painter but networked with other people?
Who has tried a painter, the networked version?
Which one?
The networked a painter. A painter, the networked version of that.
Okay.
So a painter's like tilt brush.
And it's so
when we discussed also about bringing 3D asset to prototype, even the whole experience is nice because it just immerses straight away. But if you have to prototype, usually it's for somebody else or with somebody else or with the artist. So if you can just, when you can just prototype directly in VR with somebody else and then reuse that asset eventually, that's a super efficient process. And the latency, I was doing it for somebody with somebody in Vietnam, and it's low enough so that you just have Skype or whatever you want on the side to just have the voice, and it just works.
Would you say voice is an essential component for a social VR experience? Does Rec Room is voice, yeah, and Facebook Spaces is, and what about, we have a little shopping list of the kind of features that you'd want to see in social VR spaces that would be useful for you making your own social spaces. Voice being one of them.
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be mandatory to. So you shouldn't. It shouldn't be mandatory to use your voice, because some games, for example, it's like players are, if you don't have a mic, you can't play and stuff like that. I think that's not what you want for a social experience, because some people don't want to use a mic or.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be essential, but like current online games, you can have a mic and collaborate with your team, and if you don't, you just play normally.
We need to dumb it down to communication, where you can either chat and text or something like that. But that's very
hard to chat
in
VR.
VR. And I think, for instance, the Oculus Rift has an integrated microphone, so it makes it actually very easy to integrate it. So it's not a very good one, but at least it works.
Has anyone tried the Logitech keyboard with the Vive add-on that's meant to give you some reference point for being able to type in?
I don't think anyone can try it yet.
It's not out? No? Okay. 5 buttons for different emojis? Yeah?
Oh, you want emojis?
Ah, yeah. Big buttons that you can just mash.
Actually, it could be fun, to be honest. Like one of the things that I definitely like about like texting, for example, is the fact that like if you don't see the person's face, you can use emojis to kind of like give your text a sort of like emotion in itself. So being able to just kind of like implement any sort of like effects, for example, in the voice, and make it louder or make it really quiet and stuff like that, obviously is going to give a sort of like different kind of flow. But at the same time, it's also going to be able to make it more entertaining as well. It's kind of like sending like back in MSN Messenger era, where we would be able to like send, I don't know what it was called, like that thing that would just like all of a sudden send a really big kiss to your friend or something, and it would just blow into your.
No, yeah.
What was it called?
I never got any. Anyone?
It was really annoying, but I loved it.
Other people, and then you could send.
So are you saying that you want to type an emoji and then the avatar kind of creates that kind of interaction?
That could be one. It could be one of the things.
So like angry face, then the avatar looks angry.
Of course.
I wondered if you want personal space in VR. There's been like a couple of stories about people feeling that if they didn't have a buffer around them, that someone could kind of enter their space and kind of troll them sort of physically, because if you're in an immersive experience and someone is throwing punches at you, that can put you off. But it's also hard to maintain a physical boundary in a virtual space, right? So is that something that you want to try and achieve, build in, or do you just ignore the problem? Or
there's a great game designer named Raf Koster who talks about this. He built a number of virtual worlds for Sony and others, and he did a great talk at last GDC all about these issues, and that most people starting social virtual worlds just have no clue what they're in for, because you need to have these sorts of breaks in. Facebook has the geometry disappearing as you get too close to somebody. We, in one of our virtual worlds, have force fields, so people can't get too close to you. And depending if we've had celebrities in, like singers and things, they're renowned, and so their force fields get bigger because we get hundreds of people swamping over this sphere of repelling nature. So we can kind of do 25, 50, and push. It's great because you can just put it on and people go thrown away from it. But we use it very little. But that's another way of dealing with that. But it is very easy much easier in a social context, in life size, to intimidate people and create an experience that's unexpected or surprising to people. So it's something that needs to be addressed from the beginning. It was one of the archery games, I think Quiver, where somebody was harassed in there, a lady, and they eventually fixed it in the game, but they hadn't thought about these sorts of things happening. Social VR means a lot of responsibility. Any real-time social experience you create, you're responsible for the experiences that people are having in there. Asynchronous stuff and things where you can do takedown content, it's a lot easier, but a real-time experience generally end up needing moderators, which is costly.
But the ethics behind moderation and blocking is hard. So creating the bubble, that makes sense, and every social VR platform should have that. But what happens with blocking? Is that you block someone and they can access the same experience but only with other people that have behaved badly? Do they get blocked and never get to access the experience again? What if someone actually trolls another person by blocking them and preventing them accessing the content? So blocking is quite hard to implement properly.
My question is exactly like, is if I am being annoyed by a character, can I just turn that character off and I will never see him again, but he's still part of the environment?
If he's part of the environment, or she, what if they keep trolling you with the other people that you're sharing the space with? You might not be able to see that person, but the other people can, and he can keep on trolling.
But if he gets blanked by more than a certain amount of people, then he kind of
that's the thing. What are the rules that you set to implement blocking in an effective way? There are lots of minutiae.
It's interesting in the context of the web as well, though, that you might be building in features to socially exclude people from something like the web. Kind of has an element of going against the ethos of what we're trying to achieve, right?
Well, it's a difficult time because we want to get as much audience in as possible to gain critical mass for this industry. But at the same time, the web has different sites with different forums and different password access, and you can get kicked out of a site or a forum, and each person runs their own world. In Learnbright, most of our stuff is invite only instead of public. And with Facebook groups and other platforms, you'll notice they have groups where they invite people in, or you choose who your friends are. There's nothing really necessarily focused on being public where people can troll and abuse. Business models tend to try and minimise that, to minimise the support costs. As Raf Costa said, it's cheaper to kick any person that asks for support off your system than to support them, because the cost per user is too small.
Recording could take away that, because if you have a recording, well, in that case that would be a little bit of an ethic point, but recording conversation, and if something that you can flag up to the referee and send it for revision, that could also be a way to kind of strike people.
Yeah, definitely. It's expensive because people need to see stuff. But
so my question is, since you basically have a more or less catered closed system, basically, that there's no anonymity basically because everyone knows each other kind of. So do you think it makes more sense, because the 4chan and the phenomenon happens because people don't take responsibility what they do. They can take on roles of anonymous trolls and then get fame and then turn off the computer and go home and do whatever they do. But do you think that a certain level of transparency will help people to take responsibility for their actions? So if I associate my real name in that context and I'm not under the curtain of anonymity, I behave like a normal human being and with empathy and with responsibility, instead of starting to harass and troll everyone just because I like to laugh,
That's my personal opinion is you shouldn't restrict how people can access, and anonymity should be allowed, especially if people are doing role play or playing in a game or something else. They're allowed to explore, and I think it's a false thing to try and put on people to attempt to control them. And one of the better successes we've had is with people's investment in building or creating a profile or acquiring achievements tend to be associated with their account, and they don't want to lose that. So they're building up trust relationships with people, their contacts, and virtual goods tend to bring someone into really caring about that account. And then, but we run virtual worlds, so we can actually, if people misbehave, they do get kicked off and they can lose their whole account. Of course, people get very upset about that. And the web is, I think, a little bit different to that, and we don't want to have those breaks on WebVR, so I'm torn between the two. But I don't see forcing people to have their real identity is necessary, and identity is good.
I'd rather avoid being forced to it. It's like Reddit, you have as many accounts as you want, but if you start to get karma, if you start to get contacts and everything, then it becomes pressure.
The problem
by choice.
The problem with real names has been exposed with other social networks as well. So actually, depending on what you're doing, for instance, let's say you have a social VR community for gay people to meet, then attaching your identity to your real name might actually become a problem. So you might not show up in these communities if you're living in, for instance, Russia or Belarus or something where that is an actual societal issue, or other places as well. So I wouldn't say that. So I would also go for like having a karma-based system where you're like, hey, you want to kind of... Also, you can't assume that people are actually using their real name. They might as well just use fake, real-looking names, and then you're back to square one, and the people who are actually using their real names are then disadvantaged against the people who are like using fake identities, and proving your identity is not necessarily an easy thing. Also, so maybe sometimes we have to look a little more, and I think it depends on the environment. If we have a very open environment that where you can do lots of things, then this might be hard. But if you have an environment that is a little more constrained, you might be able to like fix or prevent trolling in different ways. So, for instance, there was this demo shown at I/O 2016, I believe, where they had a poker game. So everyone was sitting around a table and playing cards, playing poker. But you could get up and walk over and change seats and stuff like that. But if you would come too close to a player, you would actually become a ghost, invisible to the rest of the players. Like you would literally disappear from the room from the perspective of the other players, and you were not able to interact with anything. So you couldn't throw around the table or something like that. But you could return back to your seat and kind of like sit back down, and then you're back in the game for everyone.
After you checked out their cards.
After you checked out their cards. I think actually they blank out the cards as well. But basically the idea is that depending on the interactions that are possible and the space you're building, you might be able to do something similar. You might be able to ghost people kinda to not necessarily hide them entirely from the entire group, but basically say like, you're still there, you might move around, but you might not get too close to other people's personal space, and you might not be able to do certain actions that could be considered trolling or abusive or whatever. Now, obviously, the question is it a use case where you can do that, and how can you determine that?
I think I'm not entirely sure. In a content creator point of view, if I'm using like a social app or like I'm basically having like, let's say a meeting with like a very important company that I don't necessarily trust because we haven't built that accord, but I'm presenting an idea, I would hate if apparently like they would be able to kind of like ghost me and be on top of me and like be able to see my notes and stuff and perhaps steal my ideas. And then because I'm not a big name or anything, kind of like put me in the shadows, and then a couple of years later come up with like, oh, we have this new film that we have decided, and I wouldn't be able to like show that I was the one that created it first.
But in that situation, you would basically, when they come too close to you, you would not give them access to your documents or whatever. You would literally put them in a parallel dimension where all the things that could be considered, that would be a problematic interaction.
It's scripted, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be security. In terms of security, that would be something that I would prefer.
As I said, that highly depends on what exactly you're building. But yeah.
And this problem is already solved for Tabletop Simulator. You can play games. You have this.
What?
Can you speak up?
Yeah. You have this game Tabletop Simulator where this problem is solved. Where you have parts of the table which you can hide from the rest of the players. But it's just I think it's just a application problem. You can solve it very easily.
Yeah, it's very.
But you should be aware of those kind of issues indeed.
I think this is already a very specific solution to a problem. I think on a more generic level, yes, of course, if you are able to determine these specific issues that you can kind of either programmatically or in the sort of gameplay block, that's great. But how do you resolve the rest, right? How do you block people from doing some sort of mean thing, scaring you, or the options are kind of endless, right? And what I'm wondering about, because what you have on the web most often is asynchronous interactions. So there is the ability to moderate forums and so on, to look at the content. When you are in a VR environment, it's not that simple, right? What do you do? Do you do like real-time policing, or what? Do you have actual employees walking around checking on people, right? What do you do? Because that's what you have in the real world. And sorry, I just finished the idea. What I'm wondering is, because I'm not a gamer, but what came to my mind was the massive multiplayer games, where you actually have this real-time interaction, and I wonder how it's dealt with there, or whether they just accept abuse there, or trolling. I don't know.
It's usually logged, so afterwards you can check what people did, and if it's not good, you will get banned.
You could also report players.
Yeah. So what you said about the police, the Alt Space VR, they had police people roaming the different rooms and seeing that everything was under control. But actually there were people who complained about the police.
So you make it invisible.
Yeah.
So we also just had here the act of reporting other people as well, so the community moderating.
1 second. You wanted to say something?
I think you were first.
All right.
No, go for it.
I just, to some extent, I think there's a great precedent in terms of how urban space works. So you have private and public spaces. Maybe your public spaces are the spaces where you're more likely to have asynchronous encounters. Maybe your private spaces are the spaces that you invite people who you don't mind. You don't have to over-specify etiquette. Allow people to self-police to some extent. I know that there are complications to this in terms of what you might be able to do in terms of hacking. One of the things that I put up the other day is, if you're creating virtual spaces, are there opportunities to actually kind of inject content that you might not want into those spaces, or maybe leave items or artifacts in spaces that people might not want there. But to some extent you have to do what you do with urban space, right? There are private and public spaces. On the whole, I want the web to be like the city street. I have the privilege of anonymity, you know, when I'm walking in public space, and I have responsibility for that as well.
So two things. Number one, I think maybe I missed it, but I think it's also how do we eventually bring that across the different platforms, and maybe that's what starts to be at the browser level. It's like, if we do it, if we have metaverse proper and social metaverse proper, for example, maybe the avatar I create in Facebook, I bring it somewhere else. Maybe there's something I do in a painter as my avatar, bring it there. And then how, if I define some constraint of the space, because Roland has been bothering me since the beginning of this conference, I want to keep a safe distance. Just an example. I want to that I spend this time to define this safe distance between us, and I want to carry it along because it takes time across the different platforms.
I have an API too. Safe space settings, yes.
Because, for example, we start to get educated, whatever we say about Facebook, about how we want, for example, my photo to be shared only among friends or family or whatever. So if we can, but it's annoying. It's a lot of settings we have to define. So if I do take the time to define those settings, then I want to be able to carry them along. Even have this sphere of protection so that anybody who tries to go too close, and I don't actually trust them, so I want them to go through all this. I want to, it will be a pain to define, so I want to be able to do so and still carry it along.
Okay.
I think there's opportunity for standards here. Quite right for standards.
So since you were talking about urban space, does it maybe make sense to apply some kind of Uber driver rating to people, rating interactions to each other, so you can kind of see this person is generally a real asshole?
I think that's good for certain types of spaces. I don't think you want that everywhere, because then you're preventing access, right? Like, I mean, I feel like there's an access.
Rating like equality, just like you rating movies on IMDb.
I think if you're using a service, it's fair to do that. I think.
Right. But I mean, if you behave in a social construct you might get one person that gives you 1 star because he's just mean, but then you have 50 ratings and it kind of equalizes out.
If I'm honest, I'd say I don't like it.
You don't like
And
it?
But
that also opens up the opportunity for bullying, right?
Yeah.
Like you can get a bunch of people kind of
ganging
up against.
Give you a bad rating.
I have worked actually on MMO games, and unfortunately this is still not a solved problem there, and not a solved problem in social everywhere, because you have software that tries to, for instance, to censor bad words or to censor even speech, but people are extremely creative and it's extremely difficult to catch them all. So in the end it usually boils down to reporting people and getting them banned. And there were tries of a system like this to vote on people, but then you get clicks. So a group of trolls, because they are usually together, they're not usually one guy, and they can in this way bully you. Exactly. They don't like you, they come, they downvote you, and you get kicked, and this is a real problem now with Twitter as well. Because alleged people, Twitter, people are getting banned in this way.
Okay.
Unfortunately, even today.
What happened to the League of Legends has a system in which people can become something like a jury in a trial, in which the accused player has to be decided upon fate.
Yes, but in this game you only have 10 players playing together, so it's fairly easy to keep.
Good.
You don't have hundreds or thousands or millions of people together.
Okay, I was told we've only got 5 minutes, about 10 minutes ago. So there was another topic, if we can squeeze it in. These are all issues, and great to solve them, and maybe have standards or components that people could use, and choose which ones to use in their site would even be better, to kind of Legoland build what they need. But the last topic was fun engagement and getting people to return in social VR. Is probably something to ponder and think about, because it's the thing that is going to keep people coming back and coming in. And we're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, if we can wrap up and then take the chairs back just for a final digest, that'd be great.
I don't know. You funny person. Pretty much.
Martin.
Yeah, I had a look on this. No, you want to use YouTube for that. Let's go there. Let's go there. YouTube.
Just because it sounds sort of useful. Kind of self-taught, so it would be nice to see what other people
am I!
do. Hey!
¿Esta es la mesa? ¿O? Una X para mesa y otra para presentador. Hola. Nope, not working. Thank you very much. Hello. Hello. Bonsoir. Oui. Okay, good. Hello. Your attention for final activities of the day. We're going to have the digest of all the 4 breakout sessions that we've had. So I'm going to ask the host to please come on stage, and then I'm going to make some announcements afterwards. Thomas? Thomas? Yep. So, digest, we can start. Which one was the first session? I think yours was the first session. And yours was the first session, right? Wait, mine?
All right. Well, our group talked about the storytelling in VR, and like we came to like a lot of like really interesting points. In terms of, I asked at the beginning like what point of views did they think that we could actually focus on, and we talked a lot about the music and the platform support at first. We talked about how like the web doesn't necessarily have a lot of like, or it seemed that the web didn't necessarily have a lot of like viable options for storytelling, and then slowly but surely we started realizing that in fact it does, because like we talked about 3D, the interaction, 360 video, the creative limitations, but the distribution and availability of tech, and how those things could actually implement more creators to actually like use the technology more and actually create even more content. We talked about the structure and the kind of like the structure of the music, but also the kind of other structures that is available for like the actual content creation, and how you need So in terms of sound, for example, we talked about like the difference of overarching sound or the positioning sound depending on where you are. We talked about the importance of emotion and how the association of certain emotion with mapping, composing techniques in order to be able to kind of like bring out that emotion in different ways, whether it be through visual or musical cues. We talked about the timing and the situation and how that could also be linked to the emotion. So depending on where you would go, you would actually have a different kind of like music or video played in order to kind of like bring out a emotion. We had some use of visual keys and how like taking people's attention could actually be really important in order to kind of like direct exactly the storytelling and the structure of it. How engaging and like how actually getting the control failure and surprise key assets could actually bring a very kind of interesting multi-choice experience to the WebVR and to all kinds of VR. And then we started talking about audiences and who our audiences are, and depending on what audience we were actually looking at, the different kinds of storytelling that we could actually portray. So whether it be learning and training, travel journalism, artists of various creative industries, health, etc. We talked about additional content existing for industries, especially in entertainment, and how they are used. How WebVR is actually just another way to kind of like use storytelling into another kind of media. So the whole concept of transmedia content, and how there's not just film and music and comic, now it's WebVR and VR in itself. And then we actually decided to talk about monetization, because at the end of the day, that's one of the things that is important, and with monetization, we can create even more. But we got back from the monetization and the crypto, and we kind of like decided that we were going to have a conversation about that some other day, and ended up talking about the importance of tools, and how if we create tools that can basically enable content creators who are not tech savvy at all, but who want to create something in VR because they know of the actual technology but don't know how to use it, that could actually make more people interested in creating something for it and create a sort of like a new passion for this new technology that is becoming more and more available to the public, but that still has that sort of like divide between if you know how to create the stuff and if you want to enjoy it. So that was it.
So I think that so second workshop breakout session which took place at this moment was about progressive enhancement. And so, full disclosure, we mainly focused on interactions there. Progressive enhancement has many aspects, but during this session we just mainly talk about interactions. So the first question was how do we manage to have interactions mapping towards different kind of controllers, let's say just for a suite of controllers. So we were like talking about the fact that showing things in VR instead of like tutorials before going to the experience, showing things directly in VR when the user is looking at his or her controller, seeing what it does, helps way more than a lot of tutorials before. And I have a general mapping. So we came to the idea of general mapping for the users across controllers, because we were like, okay, how do you use a Daydream controller instead of a Gear VR controller, which have not the same things, like the Gear VR has a trigger that the Daydream doesn't have. So we listed out a non-exhaustive list, but quite good list of interactions, which are basically pointing, clicking, grabbing and dropping, pulling and pushing, and rotations, with some twist to those things like the speed in the movement. So we were thinking about what can we do with those interactions across experiences, and the idea came that maybe it could be a good idea to have it standardized across browsers. So one idea which raised up was browser could do something which would works with IK, so inverse kinematics, in a way where if I have a suite of controllers, I can mimic the gestures of a full skeleton. So that's a lot of work, I guess, but it would enable anybody with any kind of device to mimic the top kind of device, which is actually 6DoF, but might be more than this in the future. But like to enable people to do any kind of experiences, whatever device they have. If the browsers help people to do that, to do a default skeleton. So we talked about like not push this thing to every experience, but the finished default skeleton, which is mimicked by any kind of input device, be it the mouse or the suite of controller or real 6DoF, to furnish that to the software developers which can use it or just like re-implement certain part of it to adapt it properly to their own experience. It could be something which is easier for leaning every experience interaction. That would enable users to map things, saying, okay, across experiences, when I'm doing this kind, like let's take a suite of controller and let's make this movement. The user could say, okay, in VR kind of setting things, it could set up movements which would mean something for the experience. So enabling the user to kind of define interactions properly to his own use of VR would enable accessibility. So that's really entangled to the whole discussion, because if we enable this for every user, it means really every user. So accessibility is really part of it, of this discussion. And so it's something that we might ask, that we will propose for the browser to work on, to give this basic way of doing things, and for the users to set up things within a very intuitive way of setting things up. We were talking about this basic of like, let's put your arms like this, which is a kind of mimic, fun way of doing things, and which isn't boring of selecting cases, these kind of things. It could be useful for every kind of users to use every experiences, whatever device they have. Yeah, and that's basically it. Thanks.
Okay, I was part on the diversity discussion. First, I'm sorry if someone missed the discussion. I could have made a better job in announcing it, so everyone who really wanted could join. So I'm going to talk about what we discussed. The first thing is why we think we need to talk about diversity, why this is a session on this conference. And the reality is that at the moment, our industry is white male dominated. And it turned out that we think so. In some way, the industry is not so welcoming and encouraging for diverse people to join. And we actually discovered that as being part of this community, of dominating community, we might not even be aware of the problems that we are creating in order to keep people not encouraged to join. And there's a quote that we all agreed on, that at the moment, exclusive tech event can foster an inclusive tech community. Because through this type of events that are exclusive female or exclusive black people, we actually will create a safe environment where these people will be able to join. But the end goal is that through this environment, we will increase the number of people, of diverse people who are part of the community. And afterwards, we will be able to have a common events like this one, where we have diverse people. And also, we discussed that in order, when we are building this type of events, we have to present them in the right way, because otherwise they might seem very strange to other groups, why they're excluded of them. But when you explain to the people what's the goal of this kind of events, they totally agree. Another thing that we discussed is that at the moment a lot of people want from different groups, especially we discussed about women, because we had the past, we don't have so many people of color here, so we were discussing mainly female-male type of diversity, that we require from people, diverse people, to go out and speak and encourage more people to join the community. But this is actually quite a lot of work, and we are requiring them to do it for free, which is actually not fair, because they probably need to develop personally, need to develop professionally, and they can put all this work actually in developing their career. So these kind of efforts should be actually paid. We also discussed that at the moment the avatars in VR, because we are VR builders, we have to think about these kind of issues, because at the moment avatars in VR are built male or female. There are no different kind of avatars, so this is something we have to consider when building our experiences. And we also discussed that it was pointed out that we were discussing mainly male-female diversity. Maybe this is exactly because we didn't have not so many people of color here, so we couldn't really step in their shoes and understand their problems and the way they feel discriminated in, or some kind of pushed out, left out of our community. But also this is quite a problem of locations, because in some countries there are just not so many people from these communities, so it's really hard to actually understand them if you don't travel a lot, and this requires quite a lot of funds. So that's what we discussed.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny, the CEO of LearnBright, and our topic for discussion was social VR. And interestingly, we run a couple of virtual worlds, and they're social virtual worlds, and overwhelming majority of users are female versus male in MMOGs, which is kind of interesting. Who here has actually been in a social VR environment? You just put up your hands. Okay, there's a few in the window boxes behind there that are engaging in it right now. Yuri, I think. So out of those people, who's enjoyed their social VR experience? Ooh, about a few less. Okay. So the discussion was all over the place, but I'll try and sum it up nicely. One of the things we first discussed was loneliness. Fabian, it's the solution is social VR for all of us. But we discussed some of the engaging virtual experiences and the platforms that people had tried. Things like Rec Room, Anyland, Facebook Spaces, AltSpace VR, VTime, and Google Expeditions, which uses 360s and social engagement as well. Networked A Painter, which is highly recommended. So everyone who had that experience seemed to say that was enjoyable as well. And more interesting social experiences like Keep Talking and No One Explodes, where somebody is in a headset with a bomb in front of them, and people on the outside who are not wearing a headset are giving them instructions from a manual. So that's a social experience, but not everyone needs to be immersed. So this led to what sort of things do we want to see in a social VR experience? What elements make it useful? And gestures and eye contact, being able to pull in 360 environments and videos as well. One of the people mentioned that their friends went into a social VR experience and didn't realize the other people there were real people because they were avatars, so they weren't familiar with the VR experience and knowing that those are real people on the other end. Of course, that can create some issues. We also talked about escape rooms as well in VR. And then we got into a pretty interesting discussion on, well, back to the features, voice, and somehow to be able to chat if you don't want to use your voice. And also, then we did a deep dive on issues in social VR. And that's things like, what if somebody's invading my space? What if somebody's creating an environment I don't like? And that discussion probably took up half of what we were talking about, and very interesting as well. We talked about, can we block people? Can we use force fields to push people away so they can't get too close? Or do polygons dissolve as I get too close to someone, so my hands disappear as I reach too close? Could we, one of the examples was using ghosting, so you become transparent when you walk around or too close to people as well, so you can't interact or necessarily maybe see. And one example was a poker game, so you couldn't see the cards if you walked around the back of the table. Could you use social impact, vote people out, and then a bit of a deeper discussion on how that has been handled in MMOs, and it's still a problem, massively multi-user online games, and even platforms like Twitter, which people can get barred from due to other people trolling it. Could we use judges, or could we use social voting? Could we record the social experiences so they could be logged and moderated later, which of course is a very expensive proposition to use moderators to keep an eye on everyone, which led to the idea of, should we have people with their real name in the environment versus anonymous? And of course this all goes to, well, isn't it the person's responsibility who's creating the site or experience to do all of that? But it's a lot to ask. To build a online WebVR experience is not too difficult. To build a social VR experience that meets all those criteria is a very big project, and especially if you're asking everybody to do it. So wouldn't it be better if we started looking at some standards, some components that people can choose to have on or off that enable them to add these features into whatever they're building? So that's kind of the thing that came out of the issues, was some sort of standard components. I want to have blocking, or I want to have ghosting, or force fields, or I want to use real names versus anonymous. If those components were part of some standard, then making multi-user or social experiences comes a lot easier for people to build like Lego, and then create their particular VR experience around that, their theme, their game, whether it's for meetings or whether it's for fun. And talking about blocking people and real names versus anonymity, we talked also about karma and investment in characters. If you're building something or creating a world, you don't want to lose that, so you don't want to be kicked out. So instead of forcing people, the idea of giving them kudos or investment in what they're doing might be something that encourages them to behave well. And that was pretty much it. We had one last topic we wanted to discuss, but there wasn't enough time, which is really what's the fun and the engagement in social VR that will keep people returning and make it kind of addictive to come back and keep trying these VR experiences and those hooks. So that's probably for another day, but that would be a very interesting topic to hear thoughts on. Thank you. So thank you all for a very interesting second day of the workshop. Right now, to close, I'm going to tell you about the agenda that we have for tomorrow. We've made some modifications. Basically, the whole agenda has been worked live all these days in order to adapt to the needs and new topics that might arise. So 8:30 to 9, we're going to have the registration. 9 to 10, we're going to have a session that's called What's Next, and this is going to be led by Indira Knight. In this session, what we want to do is a brainstorm, which we'll explain the rules tomorrow. It's a brainstorm on how do we make this event go further. We don't want this to be a one-time thing and it died here, so how are we going to be able to replicate or keep on working with the community? 10 to 10:30, we're going to have some demo introductions, 10 minutes each, one by LearnBright, the other one by LucidWeb, and the other one by Coherent Labs. Then 10:30 to 12, it's going to be dedicated to demos. So we're going to have equipment. We have Google Daydreams, we have Samsung Gear VRs, we have HTC Vive and Oculus, and we have a Windows Mixed Reality headset as well. So all the time is going to be for demos. Also, if you have an experience that you might want to try in different headsets, then I encourage you to please try it out in these headsets. And then 12 to 12:45, this is going to be probably the most important session of all the event, which is the opportunities and challenges. This is what we're asking every person that hosted a breakout session to please send us, put this in the GitHub before 11 a.m. so we can, again, digest this and present it tomorrow. And then 12:45 to 1, it's the closing of the event, in which I will be asking the official W3c representative in the room to help me close the event. So I would like to now ask Nico to please stand up and give him a big round of applause, because without him... And the other Nico as well, which I think is wandering around. So, so 2 Nikos, yes. And of course, to the hosts here at DigitYser, it's been really great. Finally, the activities. Now, we are looking for a place. Probably now some of us are going to go for dinner, and it would be nice to... Yes?
Yeah, just about demos. So you said like 3 people were going to talk about demos.
Yes.
There's a demo we want to showcase, and maybe just like introduce it very, very quickly, like 2 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. We could do it tomorrow as well. The idea is that tomorrow we're going to... Yeah.
Just present to people to let them know, because like we have a particular setup. We can
Great.
just...
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea is that actually, if there's someone in the audience as well that has a different demo that you want to showcase, please let us know, because the idea about tomorrow is all about engaging and talking about the experiences that we're building. So totally yes. And now for activities, dinner, and we're looking to meet up around 8 p.m. either in a place called Delirium. Don't spoil it, Thomas. Don't spoil it. Or in a place called Zebra, or if you want a more chilled environment, it could be a place called Monk. Probably we're going to try to head to Delirium. It's around Grand Place. Sorry for my French.
Maybe there is another place which is called Brussels Beer Project, and it's a place where they brew the beer, and it's just like 10 minutes walk from here.
Okay, that's another option.
We might have to choose.
So I guess we could probably, plenty of us were in this place, so yeah, open discussion.
Maybe you can put the 4 entries in the Slack and people can vote.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm not sure if everyone's on Slack, which...
Okay, so it makes it easier. There are only 3 options now. So yeah, let's try, I guess, Delirium at 8, and if not, then we can move to around the same area that we were yesterday, one of the other corners which had a bigger bar and more space. We're probably going to be publishing anyway in the Slack, in Twitter, and make sure to spread the word as much as we can, so hopefully we can see each other later. And thank you, all of you, for...
Just one thing.
Yes?
If for tomorrow, for tomorrow afternoon, if people want to keep working, until the flight, feel free, there's no problem.
Okay. If you require to be, if you want to stay here and work in the afternoon, the event's going to finish around 1 p.m. But if you need to work a bit more, or you want to stay here waiting for the airplane, doing some amazing WebVR experiences in the meantime, then that's another option. And again, thank you very much, DigitYser, for being such an amazing host. So initially, 8 p.m. Delirium, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming and making this event great.